Hi everyone, so I should be live now, hopefully. If you can hear me, then say hi. Good, okay, you can hear me. So, yeah, so as I explained on the, on Facebook and also on the chat here, this was a mistake. I actually spent a long time filming a video today, and that's actually uploaded, but I haven't published it yet. So that was going to be my video release tonight, but then I seem to have accidentally created a live stream. So I thought I'd roll with it, roll with the punches, and so here I am. I was trying to change the settings, and I seem to have scheduled a live stream. As you guys know, I'm still completely new to the live streaming side of things. So there we go. Hopefully in future, next time I schedule a live stream, I'll actually do it with a decent amount of notice. Thanks for the yo. Thank you, Pavel. That's I don't know why I said that last time. I think because I was so flustered at the fact that I'd actually managed to get online live that I didn't know what else to say, which was embarrassing. Philip, hi in Georgia, USA. And this was a mistake indeed, James. How's Lucy doing? Lucy, how are you doing? Yeah, Lucy's doing good. She's watching TV at the moment. She might duck in as it happens. She actually doesn't like being on screen very much. Is she creeping up? I closed my door to my study, and she immediately said, "No, open that. I want to hear what you're saying." So there we go. I can't. Nothing's secret, I'm afraid here. She does also read the comments underneath my videos as well. April Fool's Day, yes, indeed. Do you know, every time it's April Fool's Day, I always regret the fact that I didn't plan something really awesome. But anyway, yeah, so how you all doing? If you're locked down, then let us know. And I'm interested to know how people are passing their time when they're locked down. Are you having to work? Are you managing to work? Are you having to look after kids? Are you managing to have, are you enjoying it? I've got to admit, there are certain aspects of the lockdown that I kind of enjoy. I have been getting out once or twice a day and, to get food or to do some exercise or whatever. Although I didn't go out at all today, except for in my own garden. And I got to say, I really enjoy going out when there's no people around. It's awesome. And I've been out in the car a couple of times, and you can get everywhere so quickly because there's no traffic. It's really, really cool. Hi, Gabriel in Brazil. I've actually been to Brazil, and yeah, it was really cool. I went to Brasilia when I was working for the government. I was there on government business. Obviously, I can't tell you any more about that. There's a lot of people saying April Fools, which of course is, yes, it's like I've April Fooled myself with this live stream. But there we go. It's not like I had anything else to do this evening anyway. Oh, right. So the questions are starting to come in. Hi, Thomas in Poland. Obviously, I've been in Poland a few times. The first international humour event I ever taught actually was in Krakow in Poland. Back in, 2001, I think that was. Right, so Lucy's doing well. She's fine. What else are people saying here? So I'm just scrolling through, catching up with the messages. The scrolling in the chat doesn't work very well when there's lots of messages coming in, I have to say. Oh yeah, the other thing I was going to say is I'm going to hook up a mic to this, but clearly, because I didn't have any time to plan for today, I haven't done that. So apologies if the audio is not fantastic. But I've turned some more lights on, so hopefully I'm not quite as in the dark as I was last time. Hi from California. Hi, Mark in California. So Martin Callender says, why do you think cross guards with two balls on each side and a diamond shape in the middle disappeared in the 12th century, or was reduced in popularity so much that no examples from the period survive? I don't understand that question, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry. Can you type that out again? Can you explain a bit more? Because I don't So two balls on each side, and why do you think cross guards with two balls on each side and a diamond shape in the middle disappeared in the 12th century. I don't understand that. Sorry, Martin. They didn't disappear in the 12th century. They didn't exist in the 12th century, did they? Sander, greetings from Netherlands. Hi. So sorry, that just scrolled and disappeared then. Where are we? There we go. Tayfor Khan says, hey Matt, can you make a video on your favourite swords? I actually get asked to do that a lot. I mentioned this in the last live stream. And I can certainly talk about my favourite types of swords. In terms of my favourite actual individual examples of swords, I've just got so many and I don't know how I'd narrow it down. Hi from France, Bypass, good name. Hi, obviously I've spent a lot of time in France as well. That's okay. So I'm just reading the messages. Greetings from Korea. I've never been in Korea. Shush, Lucy. Give me all your toilet paper and no one gets hurt. Do you know what's quite funny about toilet paper? There's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Lucy and I accidentally both double ordered toilet paper before this whole thing started. So we actually already had a stockpile of toilet paper before it was fashionable. So we've got, I don't know if we still have, but we certainly had tons of toilet paper. So Stephen in Germany says, can you review the weapons and armour in the 80s film, The Beastmaster? I love Beastmaster. I don't remember there being much armour in it, really. I remember it being quite minimal in terms of what people were wearing, both in good and bad ways. So I have actually referenced the sword from Beastmaster once in one of my fantasy sword videos. I'm sure I can talk more about Beastmaster at some point. I look chilled. I do. I look tired. Hello from Ealing. Who's in Ealing? Do you come to my classes? So I'm from Ealing. I grew up in Ealing. So here's a little fact, actually, that some of you who watch my channel will also watch Lloyd on Lindy Bay's channel. And a small bit of trivia for you, which I found hilarious when I found out, is that Lloyd is actually also from Ealing. So I just find it funny that in the whole world, two people doing YouTube channels on weapons and military history and stuff are both from the exact same part of London. I think he moved away from Ealing when he was a teenager or something, and certainly he went to Newcastle for university, and that's where he now lives. But anyway, I'm from Ealing and I lived there till I was about 32, I think. A bit older than that, actually, 35 maybe. Hello from Western Pennsylvania. I'm just reading my hello messages at the moment. Are there any questions? Let's have a look let's see if I can find some questions. How about, Davaram says, how about a series of videos on sword techniques against various other weapon types, like axes, maces, ball and chain, etc.? Yes, that's a good idea. I'll give that a thought. It's not something that's covered an awful lot in the treatises. We see sword versus spear and sword versus bayonet quite a bit, but you don't see very much of, for example, sword versus poleaxe. Lucy is actually in the room. She's creeping along the floor like a ninja because she wants to be here and be part of it. She's even got, what drink have you got, Lucy? Wine. Lucy's got wine. I've got a port. I'm just going to reach. Okay, I'm just going to reach around and get my port. Rami, who always has good questions, says, what do I think about Mamluks? Sorry, it's just scrolled again. It does this really annoying thing. Right, where I have to scroll back up. Your opinion on Mamluks of the Imperial Guards and Napoleon's army and their sword. I don't know anything about them, I'm afraid. Obviously, I know something about Mamluks and I know stuff about Mamluk swords, but I don't know anything about the Mamluks of the Imperial Guard. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say about that. Beastmaster was amazing, says Philip Batchelor. Also, Beastmaster 2. Well, do you know what? I think I watched Beastmaster 2 as a teenager. Doesn't he travel into like our time or something? It's a bit like Masters of the Universe. Harry says, can Lucy teach us some silver in a video? Can you?
I mean, not right now. I've had some wine, but yeah.
Not right now. She could do, yeah. Yeah. Maybe we could have a talk about silver. Although I should probably not be in the video because then we'd disagree about everything. Yeah, I've got my own theories about some of the things that silver says, and they run contrary to everybody else doing silver.
Because you're wrong.
Yeah, I am wearing super dry. Yeah, shouting out for Lindy Beige. I guess if I have mentioned this before in videos, but for anyone who doesn't know, it was Lloyd and Lindy Beige's channel that inspired me to make my channel. No question. And I also, so that sounds like I'm really like sucking up to Lloyd, but I also have to say it's also that he started to say things about HEMA that I disagreed with. And I was like, Lloyd, I love your videos, but what you said there was wrong. So you will notice if you look at some of my earliest videos, they are kind of almost picking on some of the things that Lloyd says. But that's not to take away from, I love his channel and I still watch his videos, whereas I don't get a time to watch a lot of other channel videos, unfortunately, these days. So CNY or CN is that, I don't know if that's a word in some language. I might be saying a really rude word in the language I don't know. It says, hi Matt, in your opinion, what's the best sword to fight unicorn? Is that fight a unicorn or fight, is there someone called unicorn? I don't know, but I'll assume it's to fight a unicorn. What's the best sword to fight a unicorn? A really long one, I'd say. Zweihander. What would you say, Lucy?
I would have said longsword.
But you want something even bigger than a longsword,
yeah,
surely.
but I'm not as strong as you, so I would use a longsword.
I would say even better an S-stock, because I suspect that unicorns are really rubbish at parrying. So
If I
just
can use something else, can I use a shield and a mace?
no, that's too easy. Shield and mace.
That would be really funny.
That's a rubbish choice against a unicorn. Vetoed. Jesse Smith. This is an interesting question. How do I decide if I want to do HEMA or judo? Try them both.
Both.
Yeah, or do both if you can. So I often say to people, I wish that I'd done judo as a kid because I think it's wrestling, but it's
do catch wrestling if you want to do judo.
Not many people can get to a catch wrestling class, but anyway, do both if you can. But if you've only got time to do one or the other, then get some classes. Try them both out. Don't just judge based on one class as well. I think for you to get any kind of judgment, I've met a lot of people in my life who've said, "Oh, I tried taekwondo," or "I tried Bujinkan," or whatever, and then you go, and then they say something negative about it, and you say, "Well, how many lessons did you do?" And they're like, "Oh, just one." And the thing is, you can't, even if you're a regular in a given martial art or activity of any kind, there are good classes and there are bad classes, and also some of them will focus on some things that engage you more than others. So you really need to go to several classes to decide whether you actually like something or not. So there we go. Let's look at some other questions. Greetings from Yorkshire. I've been to Yorkshire as well. I've been to Yorkshire a few times, and now it's scrolled away again. It's really annoying. It's when I try to move the when I try to scroll at all, it scrolls right to the bottom. So I'm really sorry, greetings from Yorkshire. I didn't see your name and I can't see the rest of your message now. I'm going to scroll back up until I get to it. That is a lot of messages. Have you played Bannerlord? It says Derna 1804. I have played Bannerlord, and it turns out my PC is shit. Unfortunately, although I do know other people with better PCs who are having similar problems, I found that the multiplayer is really, really clunky, like really slow. It's not running the FPS. I'm only getting about 25 FPS, and it's not fast enough for me to play. I mean, I get about like 100 FPS on normal Warband, so I can't play multiplayer on Bannerlord. It's too painful. Single player seems okay. It runs okay and seems really good, but it's crashed a number of times, I'm afraid. So at the moment, it doesn't seem the most reliable in the world. Hello from Godalming. Hello up the road at Demani in Godalming. So you're only a few miles away from me. If I had if I had a field artillery piece, I could probably drop a shell on you from here. That's a weird kind of flex, I know. Right, Pipsqueak. Hi Matt, greetings from Yorkshire. Researching British cavalry in World War One. Do you know how the armament compared or contrasted with other contemporaries on the Western Front, i.e. France and Germany? I don't know an awful lot, but I can tell you one thing, and that's that I believe I've read, and I haven't independently verified it for myself, that the Germans, by that point, had entirely switched to lances. So as I understand it, all German cavalry, so long as they were dedicated cavalry and not kind of just mounted infantry or whatever, were carrying lances, which is quite significant actually. The French, I think, were pretty much comparable with the British, but the French, I believe, were still deploying cuirassiers and stuff at that point. So the French cavalry was possibly the most traditional, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong. The British cavalry was still pretty much the same as it had been in the Boer War, and the German cavalry had pretty much dedicated itself to lancers. But actually, one of the most, and you probably, if you're researching this, you probably know more than I do, but as I understand it, really, apart from the very opening phases of World War One and the end of World War One, when cavalry acted like cavalry, certainly a lot of cavalry were given rifles and told to get into the trenches for a lot of World War One and act as infantry soldiers. But cavalry for a lot of World War One were operating as scouts and also basically as highly mobile infantry. So they were like dragoons. So they'd have rifles and they'd have swords. And if there was an opportunity to charge in with a sword, then they did, certainly in the early stages. And this is on the Western Front. The Eastern Front's a little bit different, which I'll address in a second. But for the most part, they dismount, shoot, then mount up, move somewhere else, dismount, shoot. So they acted a bit like Boers with mobile infantry. And certainly in the British Army, the mobile infantry movements, the use of yeomanry as mobile infantry, or mounted infantry rather, was very, very important. But cavalry in World War One is a very detailed and fascinating subject, and something that deserves a lot more attention, I think, and something I'd like to read more about at some point. I actually now have a few World War One cavalry swords, and I'm quite into them. And as most of you guys know, I shoot a World War One rifle as well, so an SMLE. But there we go. I can't say an awful lot more. I'm certainly not an expert on that subject, but I know it's very interesting, and there's a lot more to be learned and said about that period. Izzy Garcia says, how were Victorian firearms manufactured? Were they all made with hand tools, or by that time did they already have lathes and mills? All of the above. So there were people hand making them, and there were factories milling and lathing. By the middle of the 19th century, you get both, and it's the same with swords as well. Some swords were being made in much the same way as they had been for the last few centuries, purely by hand and then finishing with wheels, and others were made literally on factory machines. And the company Mole of Birmingham were one of the first companies to introduce machines specifically for rolling hot bar stock, for rolling the fullers into blades, for example, and they patented it. Similar thing with firearms. The bigger companies were introducing machines that could do, for example, milling the barrel out and putting the rifling in, the grooves and this kind of stuff. It famously Colt introduced production line and interchangeable parts. In contrast, Adams revolvers, which were around and competitor to Colt, they were more handmade. So if you take 10 Adams revolvers, the parts aren't really interchangeable unless you're lucky. Whereas you take 10 Colt revolvers, and all the parts are interchangeable. So that's one of the big advantages to a Colt, is that you can, if your mainspring goes, and you've got a mainspring for a Colt, you know it will fit in your Colt. Whereas with an Adams, that's not always the case. How much loo roll do you have? Lucy, how much loo roll do we have?
I haven't done an inventory.
We haven't done the inventory, but
there is still some left.
I'm guessing we've got in the region of 30 rolls?
No.
Not that much?
No.
15 rolls?
No.
Oh, shit. I'm going to go raid. I didn't know it was getting that desperate. I'm going raiding tomorrow. Right, I'm going raiding for toilet rolls tomorrow.
The local shops have loo roll again. It's all fine. The joke is over.
Apparently the joke's over. Guys, we can now get toilet paper when we want it. We're living back in the 21st century again. Mina says, will you ever make a Sarissa video? Maybe. I don't know a lot about them, so I'd have to do a bit of research, but yes. I guess there's stuff to be said about them. My ancient world stuff is, as you know, is more sketchy than my medieval stuff in terms of I've got a lot of medieval information just ready to mine in my head, and obviously 19th century as well. But ancient world, not so much. I usually have to research more for those videos. Are you in any way interested in pike and shot warfare? Says Avatras. Yes, I am somewhat. Although I have to admit that the 17th century. is probably my weakest century in terms of my knowledge, and I always say that. So it's true of whether it's swords or anything else. The 17th century is I'm weak on. Lakmer Singh says, how about more videos on Viking weapons? Definitely. I mean, I have done a fair number, but yes, definitely I'll be doing more Viking era, Anglo-Saxon, Frankish era videos in the future, no question. Rami says, early S-stocks versus late 19th century ones in terms of penetrating armour. That's one that would require experimentation, which I'm not sure how I'm going to do, because I'm not going to slam my 19th century swords into armour, unfortunately. But a replica S-stock, so I mentioned, I think in the last live stream, I'm planning to do some Pelham versus armour, and I do want to do other things versus armour as well. Obvious things like Warhammers, but half-swording longsword into armour is something I want to give a try at some point, so S-stock is related to that, I think. Josh Walker says, are any skills from karate transferable to hand weapons? Over to Lucy. So Lucy did karate for years. I've never done any.
I did, but the last time I did karate, I was
Come up on the screen.
and I'm 34 now, so it was a long time ago. I couldn't, with any degree of accuracy, answer that.
So I would say the answer is always yes, but the question is how much.
Karate was fun.
I would always say with martial arts, you always will get transferable skills from one martial art to another, but you also get baggage. And so, for example, in HEMA, we get quite a few people with a boxing background. And funnily enough, you'd think that would just be an advantage, but it can be a disadvantage because they can sometimes have an issue with the distance management. They often want to be too close in swordplay. And sometimes with their footwork as well can be a bit of an issue. But, in terms of fitness and sort of martial arts sort of mentality and timing, and if you can tweak the distance, if you can readjust the different distance. So I know some people with kickboxing backgrounds, for example, funnily enough, a kick is a similar range to a sword cut. So kickboxing particularly, and they use passing footwork as well. So, that could be advantage in something like longsword. So, yeah. There are transferable skills, but remember there's always going to be baggage as well. And like if we take a typical example that's often referred to with sport fencing versus HEMA or historical fencing, obviously it's an advantage if you've got a background in sport fencing, but it's not only an advantage. There are some disadvantages as well, and you sometimes have to unlearn certain things. So for example, if you've done épée, then épéists always just go for the first hit, and to begin with anyway, they're a bit suicidal in HEMA terms because they tend to be very vulnerable to afterblows. People who've done sport or Olympic sabre, for example, are usually, to begin with, very vulnerable in their legs because they're so focused on, there is nothing below the waist in modern Olympic sabre. So they tend to be so focused on their upper body that it's quite easy to snipe their legs until they readjust. So, generally speaking, there's an advantage, but there's disadvantages as well. John Washburn says, no lager, ? I was drinking lager yesterday, as it happens. So we had not a live stream, what do you call it? A video chat, a Skype, basically, a group Skype with a bunch of people from my club and our club. And I was drinking lager yesterday. But William Kilmer says, is Lucy still teaching silver? As a student of silver, I'd love to see her put up some solo lessons.
I do still teach silver periodically, but I mostly teach military sabre now. But silver was the first thing that I ever did in HEMA, and it will always be something that I go back to, and some cool and interesting things are coming up in silver at the moment. So I think it would be, shout out to Darren Dadswell, I think it would be a good time to do a bit of a video on that.
Yeah, so our club in Woking, SG5.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's been so long. I forgot the names of our clubs. So at SG5, Lucy mostly does military sabre lessons, but mixes it up with occasional classes in sword and buckler or silver backsword or whatever. And Darren Dadswell, who's a long-time member, is now doing a bit of silver teaching as well, isn't he? So yeah, so maybe we can do some silver lessons, get some silver lessons up, or just silver videos in general. I can't say your username, Mr. Gigaguga says, a question from blacksmith's point of view: how do different kinds of steels perform in your opinion? Like good old carbon steel, around 45 to 95. So I guess that means 1045, 1095. CRV2 or 4, 15N20. Do you see a difference between those? I'm not experienced enough to say. So my opinion, so I like carbon steel because it's the closest, because I'm usually looking at historical weapons, and because it's the closest to the steels that were used in historical weapons. So if we take a 19th century Wilkinson sword, for example, we know the chemical composition because they published it. They used to get it made in Sheffield and shipped down to London where they made the swords. And it's roughly equivalent to 1095. So that's nearly, nearly 0.1% carbon, which is quite high carbon content. So I like them because they're traditional. I don't really know enough about the performance. I know that some people, a lot of people are using equivalent to kind of 1065, 1075, I think, for modern replica swords. I think Albion used something like 1075, if I remember correctly, or maybe it's 1060, I can't remember. CRV2 and these kind of, so that's got chrome and vanadium in it, I think, by the look of the name. A 15N20, I'm not sure what the makeup of 15N20 is. My understanding is those steels tend to be used more for knives. I don't know why they're not used more for swords. I have some vague knowledge that alloy steels with chromium in them, or nickel content that are higher, don't perform so well in longer blades. I think they're a little bit on the brittle side, so you can get good hardness. But if you're dealing with a longer blade, then they can be a little bit on the brittle side. But I'm not really sure. I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not a blacksmith. I've done a little bit of forging with pull bins.
And watched a lot of forging.
I've watched a lot of Forged in Fire. Personally, it seems that if people the people I know who make swords, make sword-sized objects, they tend to use straight-up carbon steels like 1095, 1075, or they use spring steels like EN45. So basically, for reenactment swords or even just replica swords, so people like Mark Vickers, Paul Bins, people like this, I think even Owen Bush, who make longer bladed swords in the UK, tend to use EN45, or sometimes I think EN43 is it, which I think is slightly softer, but slightly tougher maybe, not sure. So there we go. Let's have a look at a few more questions that maybe I know something more about. So Sean Horst approves of the fact that I'm drinking port wine. So do I. I approve of that. Rakes says, I'd love to see sword versus ball and chain.
Don't call it Morning Star.
Versus your ball and chain. Just okay, I see there's a joke there.
There is, but it's a ball and chain and Morning Star.
Yeah, so yes. When I was a kid, I certainly... No, it's not Morning Star. Lucy just said a Morning Star. That's a flail. So the term Morning Star comes from the German Morgenstern, and I actually believe that historically a Morgenstern is a spiked mace. So it's a spiked metal ball on a stick, which I'd really like one of actually. No, the ball and chain. So
stick with chain.
Stick,
with
chain, ball.
What's that?
Flail is a flail. Yeah, but some people. Some people do call them ball and chains, and some people call them morning stars. Someone, I'm sorry, I think your name's Korean, so I can't read it because I don't know what those characters mean. But what about knife and dagger fighting techniques in the 19th century? I haven't heard much about them. Indeed, there isn't a lot codified written down. There are some Navaja, basically Spanish and South American, should we say Spanish language country, knife fighting related texts, but no real manuals as such. And there are a few things in English. There's Alfred Hutton in Cold Steel talks about the use of the bayonet, using it like a knife. And obviously, we know that Bowie knives were used a lot, but there's no real manuals for them, unfortunately. So we just have to make it up. And there's a very good book. Have I got it here somewhere? Yes, I've got it here, as it happens. So my bookshelves are just there. So this book is called Bowie Knife Fights, Fighters and Fighting Techniques by Paul Kirchner. And this is the book I'd recommend anybody interested in this topic gets. And it's straight up about the fact there's no manuals, but what it goes through is a bit like Swordsman of the British Empire and those kind of books. It gives first-hand accounts of the use of knives at that time. From those accounts, you can actually extract some degree of information about their fighting techniques. So even tendencies between areas as well. So it talks about the fact that Mexicans used their knives, the Bowie knives and navajas and gaucho knives in certain ways, and this was different to how the knives were used in Texas, for example. But it also, does give information about the actual techniques used and stuff. But really, if you want to learn knife fighting of that type, 19th century Bowie knives, I would say look at saber technique. So you've got the principles of how blades were used at that time. Also, perhaps some foil and smallsword, and then read that book and look at the descriptive accounts, and then also look at the later period stuff, the kind of World War I combative stuff, because a lot of that World War I era, even World War II, Fairbairn-Sykes type stuff, comes from the earlier Victorian stuff that's been passed down through experience and teacher to student kind of stuff. Even though there weren't manuals then, some of this was passed down, inherited knowledge, shall we say. So let's have a look. So JD Boats 89 says, how's everything in the UK these days? How is everything in the UK these days? We don't know because we haven't been outside.
Really quite odd.
It's pretty much the same as everywhere else. We're locked down, but I think it's fine. Our death rates are going up. Our toilet rolls are going down.
It's fine for people who have stable and settled home environments. I think it's probably really horrible for people that don't.
So
we're fine.
The two groups of people that I really feel sorry for and a big kind of sympathy shout out goes to is obviously people working in the NHS. I mean, the nurses and the doctors and just everybody working in that sector are really up against it at the moment. It's pretty tough times. But I also feel really, really sorry for self-employed people, not like me, who can carry on working from home, and Lucy as well, but people who need to go out and do their jobs to earn money to put food on the table and pay their rent and everything else. The gardeners, the builders, I know construction actually is going on, but the jobs where people can't carry on doing their job and can't earn money at all, it's really it's tough, and I really, really feel sorry for those people. So if you're one of those people, my thoughts go out to you. So I must mention, so sometimes when I'm laughing, I'm reading messages that for various reasons I'm either not going to address now because they're too complicated, or because they're political or whatever. Golden Eagle says, how is your baby boy and Lucy? So Lucy's fine, she's sitting on the floor. I think she doesn't want to be on the screen.
There's no chair for me.
We'll get one.
No, but then it'll be the wrong height, and that would be annoying.
Do you want to sit on this chair?
I can do this.
Yeah.
But they can't see. Hi.
There we go.
But,
there's a delay, just so you guys
there's a 30
don't realize.
delay.
Yeah, is it 30 seconds?
I've been counting seconds because I'm cool.
Oh right, yeah.
It's a 30 second delay,
So it's quite weird because I look at the screen, but that's me 30 seconds ago. So it's a weird time lapse.
But no, both the children are doing really well.
Yeah.
All is
Lucy has been homeschooling Lily. She also picked me up on the fact that in the last live stream I referred to, or in last video I referred to, we have been homeschooling. I have not been homeschooling. So basically, Lucy has the kids in the morning, I have the kids in the afternoon, and during the morning Lucy's been doing homeschool for our daughter Lily. So and the baby boy's doing great. He's getting quite hench. He's got a really strong grip. And no, he's lovely. He's a fairly easy baby, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's really happy. He's laughing at stuff, and he's absolutely lovely. So we're very glad we had a second one. If he'd been a horrible baby, we wouldn't be so glad. No, but he's really lovely. And thanks for asking, Golden Eagle. So Jim Westcoat asks, or Westcoat says, how about Confederate edged weapons? They have some gnarly knives and swords. Would love to hear your opinion on them. I really dig their short swords. Yeah, so that is true. They so for those of you who don't know, during the US Civil War, all of the factories making armaments, I think pretty much all of them, were in territories which were under Union control. So the Confederates had to kind of make do with either what they already had in storage or in circulation, or they had to import it from places like Britain, because Britain was completely mercenary, as you know, in the 19th century, very ruthless and cutthroat, and sold weapons to both the North and the South in the Confederacy and the Union in the US Civil War, made lots of money selling Enfield rifles, for example. Adams revolvers went out there, 1853 patent swords and 21 patents, all sorts of stuff. Incidentally, Robert Gouldshaw, I believe his name, so the officer who the film Glory, played by Matthew Broderick, is based on, he had a Wilkinson officer sword, specially made Wilkinson, very nice. It turned up a few years ago in a collection. But getting back to the question, and so the other point is the Confederates, apart from using what they had and importing, they also made stuff, but therefore, because they were making it without an established industry for the most part, a lot of their swords and knives and stuff are quite gnarly, to use Jim's expression. And they have like these D-guard Bowie knives and stuff, and they're quite crudely made. Some of their cavalry swords are quite crudely made, but they have an attraction to them because they are so characterful and they are very much sought after. And it has to be said, unfortunately, any of us in the antiques industry are very aware of the fact that there's a high degree of faking of them has been going on pretty much since the war ended, since the Civil War ended, US Civil War ended. So there's a lot of fakes around. It's quite difficult to disentangle the fakes from the real ones, especially because they are quite gnarly and they're quite kind of like homemade. So yes, it is something that I should do a video about. You're absolutely right, Jim, and I will do at some point. My knowledge on them is cursory, but I can certainly do an overview video of the kinds of things that they were making and mention some of the things that I've just mentioned here, the fact that there are a lot of fakes around. But I can certainly find some examples from museums and show them on screen and stuff. Yeah, it's a really good idea. Right, I'm going to scroll down now. So M Ford says Krull is better than Beastmaster. I'd actually agree with that. As a movie, objectively, Krull is a better movie than Beastmaster. However, Krull featured a lot of unattractive British people who failed 70s and 80s movie TV careers, whereas Beastmaster had some really buff and really good-looking American people in it. So I would say that visually, Beastmaster is probably nicer to look at for the most part. But Krull is a better story. That is absolutely true. Morton Stamp. It's really funny how this live stream has mostly become about Beastmaster. I couldn't have. You've never seen Beastmaster, have you? Shall we put that on the list? You'll love it. It is so cheesy, and it's got the worst special effects in the world.
Who is in it?
No one that you've ever heard of is in it. Right, I think that the girl in it is called Tanya something, and she did some movies of dubious, that you wouldn't show to your kids. Yeah, so Morton Stamp says that Beastmaster sounds like the kind of movie you'd have to be drunk to enjoy. I don't know, you can enjoy it sober as well. So Pavel Keric, which I'm guessing is a Czech name, that's a pure guess. Is there any treaties covering safe falls with swords and defensive wrestling in general, preferably bolognese sauce? That's really specific. No. So I actually don't know of any European treaties that talks about safe falls. I don't know if you mean safe falls specifically with swords, but the answer is basically no, as far as I know. If anyone knows of one, then post underneath. But no, I don't know of anyone.
Defense.
Yeah, that's true. Defensive wrestling. I don't know exactly what you mean, but I mean, obviously, there's lots of wrestling sources, and I guess some of that is defensive. But
all wrestling is defensive.
Or is all wrestling offensive?
Both, because there's no point in.
Lucy knows much more about wrestling than I do.
There's no point in having one without the other, unless you're obviously wrestling someone who's a lot smaller than you. But yeah, the basis of wrestling is defensive. To begin with, you want to stay on your feet.
I'm rubbish at wrestling questions, I'm afraid. Now this is a really interesting question from Kuno SA1. Did the colder temperatures during the Little Ice Age, which was, I guess you mean the 14th century one, which was related to the eruption of Krakatoa and such like, so we're talking the same kind of time as the Black Death and the 100 Years' War, did the colder temperatures then have any effect on armour design and the amount and coverage thereof? I don't know, but it's not the first time that I've seen this question raised. It's possible, or rather I'd say it's not impossible. I think it's more likely that it had an effect, a tangible effect on clothing. And I think most people agree that the layers of clothing and frankly the quite hefty amount of clothing that people were wearing between the 14th century and the 16th century possibly are related to that, yes. And of course, wearing heavier clothing and the capability to wear heavier armour because the temperatures are slightly lower obviously has ramifications for military technology and the types of weapons used and all this kind of stuff. So yes, it's possible, but I'm not completely convinced because I know a bit about dendrochronology, which is the obviously the measuring of tree rings. So you can tell how much trees grow each year, and this is very useful in dating in archaeology. I'm not sure how much on average the temperature went down in different parts of Europe, but I have often, when you look at Italian early Renaissance Italian paintings, and you recognise the fact that there were large armies in Italy. If we look at the paintings of Paolo Uccello, for example, like the Battle of San Romano, there were armies in Italy in the height of summer wearing full plate. And for anyone who's worn full plate harness and who has worn armour, particularly plate armour, because it doesn't let the heat out very well, or even it doesn't let the moisture out either. Anyone who's worn armour in summer during reenactment or living history type stuff, or even possibly even LARP and stuff, will know how unpleasant it is. And I can't even imagine what it was like being on campaign and potentially marching and campaigning. And obviously you'd take your helmet off, you might take elements of your armour off when you were just marching, but certainly in combat and not knowing when combat might start, wearing a lot of armour in the height of summer must have just been horrible. Well, it is horrible, but when it's a real life or death matter, that motivates you more. But we do know, for example, at the Battle of Agincourt, at least one of the high-ranking English knights, I've forgotten his name now off the top of my head, did die from what we can only describe from the sources seem to be heat exhaustion. So it must have happened. Did the mini ice age have an effect on the degree of armour and clothing worn? Maybe. And you know, it's obvious to point out that in the 16th century, the levels of clothing seem to get slightly lighter, and certainly the levels of armour get lighter for most types of soldiers. So was that related to climate, or was it just related to gunpowder changing fashions? We don't know. But it's a very interesting point, Kuno. And the answer is I don't know, but it's something that we can certainly talk about. So, right, let's scroll down. I'm probably only going to be able to about 3 more questions, I reckon, and I'll try not to be as wordy as I normally am. So, Last Evergreen has an interesting question. Your thoughts on fighting with two-handed weapons on horseback, like poleaxes and longswords? Depends on the size of the of the two-handed weapon. We know that lances were used two-handed sometimes in the late Roman period by cataphracts. So you can hold a lance two-handed on horseback, and that's perhaps important at a time before they had stirrups, maybe. In terms of using longswords on horseback, there is some medieval art showing it. So we know it was done occasionally, but obviously, generally speaking, when you're on horseback, you want to hold the reins in your left hand. So generally speaking, a longsword would be used as a one-handed sword on horseback, hence the popularity of the longsword or the bastard sword, because you can use it on horseback as a one-handed sword and you can use it on foot and as a two-handed sword. Obviously, you can have a shield, especially a strapped shield, on your arm at the same time as holding reins in your hand. Theoretically, you could hold a boss grip shield at the same time as holding reins as well, and this seems to be what they did in the Frankish and Carolingian era. But a strapped shield possibly makes that even easier, because then the straps just hold themselves, especially with a guige or strap around your neck. So you can have the shield taking care of itself, blocking one side, and you can hold the reins in your hand and you can steer with the reins. I've done one riding lesson with Toby Capwell and Dominic Sewell, who runs a horse riding and jousting centre up near Peterborough. And that was all holding the reins in your left hand and using it a bit like a joystick. So very different from holding the reins in two hands as most modern horse riders would do. But once you're holding the reins in this hand, it completely frees up this arm to do whatever you like. As soon as you drop those reins to use two hands on here, you've got no control over the horse except for your legs. And your legs are important, but nevertheless it reduces your points of control on that horse. And as Pietro Monte and I can't remember his name now, the Spanish guy who wrote a treatise about fighting on horseback in the 16th century, I can't remember his name, point out that your ability to control your horse when you're mounted is akin to your ability to control your legs when you're on foot. So your ability to control the horse is super, super, super important. And the basic rule is the best horseman, regardless of how good you are with your weapons, the best horseman, if you're both on horseback, will usually win the fight. So very important control over the horse. So if you're going to drop the reins and grab a weapon with two hands, you better have a really, really good reason to do it, because the disadvantages of dropping the reins are quite big. I will finally mention one example from history I remember, and I can't remember the source, where it describes a person taking the reins of the horse and sticking them in their teeth so that they could hold control to some extent the horse with the reins in their teeth while they used the weapon two-handed. As I say, you've got to have a really good reason to use that weapon two-handed if you're going to drop the reins, because dropping the control of the horse is almost paramount. It's almost more important than what you do with the weapon. So to conclude that point, that's it really. You've got to have a very good reason to use two hands on a weapon, a very specific and good reason to not have one hand on the reins. Right. Arcane Knight says, Matt, you remind me of Stannis. I get this a lot, and I don't know why. I've never read the Game of Thrones books. So I don't know if that's... I don't know why people say that, but there we go. Reek of Death says, greetings from Denmark. Hi, Denmark. I've been to Denmark twice in my life. I've been to Odense, is that right? And I've been to Aalborg, and I've been to Aarhus as well. So I've been to 3 different places, but only 2 times. And Reek of Death says, Matt, do you know why the French gendarmerie had the infantry bomb signet? I presume because they were grenadiers. So the grenade was the flaming bomb symbol, and grenadiers originally were armed with grenades, at least in France, and they were chosen from the biggest, strongest men, and I believe every regiment had a company of grenadiers, and the company of grenadiers were the biggest, strongest men in the regiment, and their job was to basically scare the crap out of the enemy and charge into breaches and lead the way, lead by example. So they were the kind of the biggest, the most fearsome, the strongest with grenades, kind of shock troops. I think that was the origin of them. However, later in the 18th century, grenadiers weren't always exactly that, and certainly in Britain, grenadiers became simply the biggest and strongest, and they didn't have grenades, but they kept the grenadier symbol. So I'm partially guessing, and partially this is an educated guess, I suspect that the gendarmerie have that as a symbol because they grew out of the grenadiers, I guess, and who were kind of elites. Matt Bomb 1415, I bet your name is because of Agincourt. It says, how long have you been doing HEMA for? Since 1997. So 23, what year are we? Yeah, 23 years. I started in 1997. I did a couple of years with Terry Brown studying George Silver, ironically, mostly, and other backsword sources. Then I broke off and I was co-director of the Exiles for a couple of years, running that with Rob Lovett. And then I broke off and started Schola Gladiatoria, which unofficially started in the year 2000 and was officially named in 2001. So there we go. So Schola Gladiatoria officially is 19 years old. Next year we'll have some kind of 20-year celebration, I'm sure.
If we're allowed out.
If we're allowed out, yeah, if we're unquarantined by that time. Who knows? Next year we might be the elites. We might be the new, I don't know, we might be running things, local warlords or something. Do I hope for that?
No.
I kind of do. I'm old. What? Like I'm 40. Well, how old am I? 42.
Wait a minute.
No, I'm 43.
43.
Shit.
Yeah.
I'm 43 now. Okay, the best of my life might be behind me. If the apocalypse really goes down, there might be.
Choose who's on our team.
I might be the new Rick Grimes or something. I don't know.
You know he has one arm in the actual.
That's okay.
Bird.
Well, I like saber, so one arm's not a big problem, and I write with my left hand. So you know, if it's my right arm that gets chopped off, then I can just do left-handed saber. No, I'll definitely have a big revolver. Right. So we're going to do 2 more questions. I know I said 3 more some time ago, but what?
I think it was 4 questions ago.
Right. So 2 more questions, and then I've really got to log off because I've got to eat some dinner. Kishti Raj. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Kishti Raj. How did you get into Indian weapons? It's an extremely niche area. Even Indians don't research much on that. Thanks from India. Well, thanks for messaging. I actually get a lot of stick from commenters under my Indian weapon videos from India by either to do with my pronunciations or because people think that I haven't represented, that I've said things that are wrong, but usually they're wrong, and actually but I point out that actually I'm right. So Indian weapons are awesome. How did I get into them? How did I not get? Why wouldn't I get into them? So in Britain, for obvious historical reasons, there are actually a lot of antique weapons around, antique Indian weapons around, and I think they're good quality, well made a lot of the time, beautiful designs. They're very varied, very diverse. I love. Obviously, I know a fair amount about British history, but I know quite a bit about British colonial history, and therefore I've learned about bits of Indian history, pre-colonial, and obviously during the everything from basically 16th to 20th century. So I've got an appreciation, I guess, for the history, the weapons, also how they interlink with British history, and I get to buy the things and own the things myself, and I really like them. And the quality, I think it's the quality and the diversity of them. Lucy really likes Tulwars specifically, and Qatars. Kukris as well, they're Nepalese, but you do get Indian ones. And yeah, I think it's the quality and the diversity, and the fact that also as a historian's point of view, we've got 19th century written sources describing in detail the use of these weapons. And when we're studying European history, hand weapons, which is mostly what I'm interested in, although I shoot guns as well and shoot bows as well, I'm mostly interested in hand weapons. And in Europe, hand weapons weren't used so much by the 19th century when we get these very detailed and a lot of written accounts. But in India, they were still used a lot. So the first-hand primary source descriptions of the use of hand weapons from India are numerous from the 19th century, and I love that. I love being able to read about that stuff, and I love being able to collect the weapons as well. So I hope that kind of answers the question a bit. Right. One last question.
Oh, ask them a question. Ask them what Nintendo Switch game they recommend.
Okay. So Lucy wants to know, what Nintendo Switch game do you recommend? There we go. That's our question to you. And so Alex Lynn has asked a really good question, but I don't know the answer. Are hussars and uhlans just a different term for light cavalry unit? I don't think so. I think uhlans are lancers. I think.
You can't end on a question you don't know.
Yeah, no. So I don't know. It depends which country you're talking about. Uhlans, I think, are always lancers, and hussars can be lancers or not. But anyway, I'd have to research that to be 100% sure. How did you get into selling weapons? Because I collect weapons.
You had too many.
Yeah, exactly. I had to sell some in order to buy more. No, it was simply that. It was just scaling up. It was because I wanted to buy things that were more expensive than I could justify. So I started buying things that I could sell at a profit so that I could collect sword money, as Lucy will know it's referred to. So sword money was separate to paying the bills money. And so I would try and make a profit selling things. And I found that I could do that and make it into a business. And that's now my job. Probably almost my main job, together with YouTube now, actually, and HEMA stuff. Right. Oh, that's very sweet. So I can't say the first name. Kishti Raj says, I'm always correct and extremely unbiased. I'm certainly not always correct, but I try to be as unbiased as possible, and I try to correct myself if I find out I'm wrong, because otherwise what's the point in saying anything? You are pretty unbiased. I'm trying to find the last question. Ass or tits, says Brett Alvarez. I don't know that I can answer that with Lucy here. Why not both?
I think they're both,
fairly functional. Ass is definitely. I mean, an ass.
I think you're in danger of going off the path that you don't want recorded on the internet.
Well, you need an ass, but you don't need tits.
Well, kind of. I mean, at the moment, you do more than you did previously.
Historically, I'm kind of a legs man, but anyway, let's right. So. Uhlan's a German, Matt. Okay. I'll accept that. I thought the term Mulan was actually Austro-Hungarian. But anyway, I don't know. Like I say, I don't really know. We've got some interesting... Notice me, Matt Senpai, says Senatus... I've noticed you, Senatus Populus Romanus. That's the senator of Roman people, I think. Anyway. There are no martial arts in the Arabic lands. That's not true. There are definitely... there's loads of stuff in Arabic. 19th century lance versus medieval ones. Well, there are different types of lance. So the 19th century lance would be called a demi-lance in the medieval period, in 15th century anyway, I think. There's just light and heavy lances and things in between. I'm going to find the last question. Oh, there are Mamluk treatises from the 14th century on both archery and hand weapons, written in Arabic, and they're from Mamluk Egypt. Very, very cool. They're stored. The original sources you can find both in the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. There's awesome stuff. I really wish more people were working with the Arabic sources and the Persian sources and the Indian sources. There's a really awesome Indian treatise that I believe is stored in Lucknow University Library, 17th century, and it shows a bunch of different sources, use of tulwars, use of the two-handed, so all kinds of stuff. And I've only found a few pictures of it, but oh man, I'd love to see some of the Indian treatises out there translated. There's also Turkish treatises on use of various weapons, including bows, particularly. So there's so many treatises out there, and I'd love to see more of it translated. Right. I'm trying to find a last question, and I can't find one.
Did you find the answers to my Nintendo Switch question?
Have we got any Nintendo Switch game answers? Let's have a look. Shamshir dual wielding question. Yeah, it was a thing, yes. So, funnily enough, in that 14th century Mamluk treatise, which I've got up here, I tell you what, Lucy, talk at the screen while I find it. Hold on. Talk at the screen.
I don't have anything to say.
Talk about Nintendo Switch.
No, I literally.
Oh, I'm a legend. So I found it that quickly. So it's called Medieval Muslim Horsemanship, a 14th century Arabic cavalry manual by G. Rex Smith, published by the British Library. And in this, we've got, unfortunately, it's just lots of, he didn't put a translation, but it's called a Furusiyya, and you can see lots of Arabic text up there, which I can't read. And it's talking about the use of the sword on horseback here. I do know some people who can read this, incidentally, and have sent me bits of translation for bits of it, and it is super interesting. And there's hunting a boar with a lance from horseback with a bunch of text. I'm trying to find it, there is dual wielding of Shamshir in here. Although I think that we should more correctly call these Kilich rather than Shamshir. Although they both mean sword, actually no. So Shamshir is Persian, so it should be called Saif actually, because that's the. There we go. So he's doing some kind of trick with two swords here, and I'm sure there was another one in here. Yeah. So here he's doing some kind of trick with two bucklers and two swords, and here something with a buckler and a lance. It's like tent pegging. So really interesting stuff. And there, like I say, there's Persian ones. I think there's 3 or 4 Mamluk ones. There's certainly one, because I've got one here. But I think there's 3 or 4 Mamluk ones. There's a few Persian ones. I know there's definitely a Turkish treatise on archery, and I think it's got some sword stuff in it. The Persian one, if I remember correctly, has some really cool stuff in it to do with the use of the mace, and it talks about smashing the opponent's sword with your mace, which is an amazing detail when you think about it, because I've never even thought about that before, but when you think about the fact that the opponent's sword is materially more vulnerable than a mace is, with a mace, you don't really have to worry about it breaking. So if you're just bam, 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 just laying into someone, if they're trying to parry with their sword, not only do you have a weapon which is heavy at the end and which might blast through their parry, but there's every chance that their sword will break in the process. So anyway, right, I really must do one last question. Let's have a look. Let's see if there's a really good one here. Most of the Zelda series are worth playing. I know Lucy's got at least one of the Zelda games on Nintendo Switch. There's loads of really good suggestions here. Thanks for that, guys. Lucy's actually popped upstairs, but she will really appreciate this. Jabba the Hutt says, did you play Mountain Blade Bannerlord? Look, earlier in the stream, yes, I did play it, but unfortunately my PC struggles with it. It's a bit heavy duty on my computer, unfortunately, so I've gone back to playing Napoleonic Wars. I do incidentally play on Napoleonic Wars on Mini Siege server, as most of you know, as Scholar Gladiatoria. Right, let's try and find the last questions. Hi, gentlemen. Greetings from Ohio. Another place I'd like to visit at some point. I'd like to live in America, basically, but Lucy's not ready for that. I want to own more guns.
If you move my whole family to America, I'll move
there. This is Brigadier 998 says, Matt, I'm an ex-SG member and we're working on a Mamluk manual. Contact me because I want to hear more about that. Let's do a video. I'd absolutely love to talk about that. Really, really cool stuff. Oh, cool. So Mekratrig says, Matt, I'm translating a 1500s Arabic manual. Would you read it if I sent it to you when I finish? Hell yeah! That would be absolutely awesome. I'm totally up for that. They are here. So I've received a message saying that YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will extreme buffering. So if you're extreme,
It says experience buffering, not extreme buffering.
Extreme buffering. So if I apologise if you're
experiencing extreme buffering.
If you're experiencing extreme buffering. I didn't mean to extreme buffer you. I'm sorry. And right, oh God, I'm really trying to find the last question to do. So there are good questions coming in, but more guns is good. Matt, there was a super chat question. So how do I view super chat questions? I noticed someone say that before, but I don't know how I see a super chat question. How do I see a super chat question? If you guys can tell me that, I'd really like to know. Viewer activity.
What makes them super? DCU.
I'm really trying to work out how I can see super chat questions. Where do I see super chat questions?
I mean, I don't trust anything.
Does anyone here know?
Sure, there's a super chat question stream.
We're going to buffer like it's 1999. I like it. Mark Persad says his buffering is fine. Matt is new to live stream. Hell yeah, that's true. Yeah, Jim Nichols, you also have Albion Swords in America. I know you've got lots of good things in America. I love America, actually. I was in Maryland and Virginia in 2016, and I loved it. I've been in Arizona, Nevada, New York. I loved it. Yeah, so and you know, my one of my best friends, Scott Brown, is in Florida, and in fact, for those of you, I don't know what this is a personal thing, but I've actually got more family to me, not Lucy, but I've got more family on my side in America than I have in the UK now. I've got cousins and all sorts all over the States. So yeah. Right. How do I view Super Chat? Does anyone know? The Super Chat is gone now. But go back through your stream and you can see it. Maybe answer it in another video. Let's have a look.
Are you sure they're not winding you up?
No. I know Super Chat's a thing because my buddy Raffaello at Metatron. So for those of you who don't know, I am actually genuinely friends with Raf. And we don't actually do much YouTube collaboration, but we always talk about it, but we never get around to coordinating ourselves. But he's a really good guy, Raffaello, and he's lovely. And he was telling me all about Super Chat. Right, someone's shouting Matt Super Chat, but I can't see. Where's the Super Chat? How am I supposed to tell what a Super Chat looks like? I can just see lots and lots and lots of messages. Read the Super Chat, Matt, Andrew K says. Well, where do I see the Super Chat? I'm really sorry if you put Super Chat because I don't know how to see it. Let's see. Viewer activity, is that... The Super Chat got answered, but I think that the highlights ran out. Oh, right. Super Chat looks super. Okay. Okay, well, I guess I'll just kind of look out for something looking like Super Chat coming on. The problem is I'm looking up the chat, as it were, and I'm talking for too long. Hey, you know. Yeah, Metatron has been a little bit poorly. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, Italy's been hard hit by Corona. I don't know whether that's the. Oh. Ah, right. Okay, so I've just seen how I can see Super Chat now. So, Senators Populus Romanus, I believe you did a Super Chat. Been he says, been loving your content on the weapons and armour used by the glorious legions of the Eternal City. Your content is amazing and very educational, but in my opinion, Carthage must be destroyed. Yeah, okay, I can see the super chat, guys. This is amazing. I've just worked out how the super chat works. Yeah, so I will definitely want to do more Roman videos. Obviously, from a personal point of view, I actually had to study, when I was doing archaeology at university, I had to do units in Roman archaeology in order to do medieval archaeology and history, because they considered you had to understand at least the late Roman period to understand the early medieval period, and I 100% agree. So I'll definitely be doing more Roman content in the future. And I also love Roman weapons and equipment. And Fabrica Cacti do really nice replicas, so I'll be getting some more stuff from them in the future. So there's more super chats coming in. I now understand how the super chat works. Right. So Furry Favkis Nexarade, I think, says, hey, while you're here, try Captain PvP game mode in Bannerlord. It's so good. It's army versus army, 6v6. Person versus person, and each player controls their troops. All comes down to strategy and tactics. It's absolutely brutal and awesome. Good suggestion. If I get a new PC that runs Bannerlord in multiplayer, I'll definitely be doing that. It really sucks for me because I was so excited about Bannerlord. I absolutely love Mount and Blade. I've never found another game that I love as much as Mount and Blade and Warband. Yeah, I used to play a lot of IL2 multiplayer. I love flight sims and I love World War II planes. It's something I have considered doing videos about on my channel because, of course, you know, Lloyd does videos about tanks and I do love tanks, but I actually know more about planes.
You do love planes.
And Lucy can verify for the fact that literally I feed the baby milk while watching documentaries about World War II aces and stuff. But yeah, so that's one of my off-topic interests, but yeah. But back to Bannerlord. I think I probably just need. I probably need a new graphics card actually, or maybe just a whole new computer. So Mekratrig says, "Hi, if I were to do an amateur translation of an Arabic treatise on sword fighting," he says, "I'm fully bilingual in Arabic and English, and have a historical background for what it's worth. Could I send it to you, and would you read it?" Absolutely 100% yes, and you should publish it and I can help you do that. I know people who publish these things. So Mekratrig, if you want to do it, publish the heck out of it. You can make some money out of it and everyone can enjoy it. Or if you don't want to make money out of it, we can put it up somewhere for free and lots of people can read it. So yes, that sounds awesome. TSM Space says, this is Super Chat. Thank you. I now understand what Super Chat is, and I now understand how it works.
Oh my god, watching this live stream is super weird.
And Sean Ali says, Super Chat message test. Thank you again, very much appreciated. Aaron Katona says, hi Matt, loving your videos. Thanks for all the entertainment. Looking forward for more. Thank you for watching. And Marshall Banana says, what was Roman cavalry used for? Well, probably the same as other cavalry, I'm guessing. So I haven't studied Roman cavalry specifically, but obviously there are different kinds of Roman cavalry. We know that there were types that were for scouting and harrying the enemy. We know that there were heavy Roman cavalry who had the full kind of lorica with scales. Can't remember what the name of that's called. There's a cataphract, heavy, and even where the horses were armoured. So I think the answer is they had various different types of cavalry for different purposes. I think that's definitely the simple answer. The more complicated answer, I think someone like Raffaello is probably going to be better placed to answer that than me. But we certainly know that they had missile weapons and close combat weapons. And the fact that Roman cavalry had Spartha, or Sparthae, for plural, I think definitely TSM Space says, has career in YouTube, doesn't know Super Chat. I know, I'm such a noob. Hey, look, you know how recent it was that I actually started editing videos. But yeah, back to Roman cavalry. The fact that they had dedicated swords, longer bladed swords, means they must have been used in close combat. They weren't just for scouting. They weren't just for harrying. They weren't just missile troops. But yeah, there we go. I mean, that's the best answer I can give in the current moment. So let's have a look at what other people are saying. I really must wrap it up, or we're going to starve to death because it's dinner time. Oh well, look, it's Cat Easton.
They were asking for him. So
oh, were they? So you actually
he was warmed by the radiator.
What we discovered is you actually need two people on this to keep up with all the messages.
I think that's what that Joe Wixco does with his PE thing. Is someone's reading his messages.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So Kishti Raj, I'm sorry again for that, for not knowing how to say the first name. Says let us know further in advance about the live stream next time. Obviously, I will. Of course, like if this was just an accident to do this time. Zevin X says Roman cavalry was used for dying to Parthian cavalry and Greek cavalry and African cavalry. Yeah, it's got to be said the Romans weren't famous for their cavalry, but you know they did use auxiliary, I guess. Does Lucy have a channel? So Lucy should have a channel. Lucy does have an Instagram, don't you?
I do have a channel, but it ain't about swords.
What? Oh, you do? So tell us about it, Lucy.
Technically, I have like 4, but I have a crochet channel that I've not updated in a very long time, and some of my pet-based websites have YouTube channels as well.
Yeah, so Lucy does lots online. She manages a bunch of websites and runs a successful business. So. But you're not here to just pimp your businesses on my channel. Look, it's a plane. It's a Mosquito. Mosquitoes, best fighter bomber of World War II. Right, so I'm going to have to finish up now. This has been good. Rami really wants me to talk about Coldstream Guards swords in the Crimean War.
He'll talk about all those things for you in another video.
I actually own 3 or 4 Coldstream Guards officer swords from the Crimean War, but I will talk about those in a video another time. But
you are incapable of leaving.
No, so this is a good question. This is a good question to finish off. Nico Petri says, so I was always wondering about dialogue between HEMA communities from different countries. For example, do you know Martin Fabian? Yes, I do know him. He's come and taught at Fight Camp, and I've shared a beer with him. He's a lovely guy, and like one of the best longsworders in the world. He would kill me in about 2 seconds with a longsword. But with a saber, maybe I'd last a bit longer. I don't know. But yeah, no, he's a lovely guy. Or the Sprech Fencer blog. I think I've possibly read that at some point, but I don't know it very well. Do I talk to them? Yes. Basically, those of us who run HEMA clubs are actually not that many in the world, so most of us know each other. And a lot of us in Europe are members of HEMAC, the Historical European Martial Arts Coalition, of which I'm a founder member. So a lot of us have communicated in the past through that as well, although it's a bit quiet these days. It's kind of died a bit. Right, I'm going to finish up there. I am so grateful for the super chats and all of the chat, all of the questions. Keep watching the channel, spread the word, spread the love, stay safe, stay indoors, save a life, all of that kind of stuff. And I didn't realise how useful this live stream was going to be for me, actually, particularly in terms of inspiring future videos. So super awesome. Thank you so much. I will look back at the Nintendo Switch. Thank you, Desmond Crane, for the context super chat. And yes, I will look back in the chat to see or rather Lucy will look back in the chat to see the Nintendo Switch recommendations. Apparently everything to do with Zelda, all the Zelda games are worth playing.
See, I've not played the most recent one because it's got graphics I don't like.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Try it. Give it a try.
Yeah, but try it is easy to say when it's costs like 50 quid.
Yeah, the Andrew K, the P38 Lightning, I'm a big fan of. And having made a few models of them, they're just a beautiful, beautiful plane. Only good at boom and zoom, obviously, but it did great against get great against zeros when used in that fashion, boom and zoom. And I love the fact that with the props on it, it doesn't twist to one side when you start the engines up, which is a really nice twist. Right, okay, not twist, so to speak. Right, more aircraft. Yes, let's talk more about planes next time. Massive Geek signing out. Thank you for signing in. See you really, really soon. I Post Swords. Shout out to I Post Swords. Big fan. And